thought I had made the right choice. The day after and the months after, I really began to question that choice. I voted no.
We are talking about a big change in the British Constitution. It's like home rule within the United Kingdom.
English votes for English laws requires a decisive answer.
It was the view of Westminster that the Scottish question had been settled and it was to be brushed aside. To find out that what you'd thought was going to happen kind of didn't materialise. That was really tough. This time, I would vote yes.
Myself and most of the people I knew voted no in 2014. Pretty much everyone would have said that the Yes campaign won the argument, but they'd already decided really. The big change for me was Brexit. I was born in London, came up to Edinburgh University in the 1990s and got into mining and petroleum, renewable energy. Did my masters up here at Dundee Uni. You know, I've been working on natural resources here in Dundee for the last 7 years or so.
You, English, out!
I spent 11 years in Scotland, 7 years in Dundee and 4 years in Edinburgh. I've never had any anti-English, it's just not there. Often I find the people coming out of that are people who don't stay in Scotland. They've been told that there's anti-Englishness and they are English. And they say, okay, well if I went to Scotland, I'd confront this, I'd have this in my face, but you don't. I'm just telling you, it just doesn't happen. We make our own decisions. In terms of the 2014 referendum, the Yes side couldn't have done much more than they did. If people are not there willing to be convinced, then it doesn't matter what you say, frankly. But I think this time there were far more soft voters, far more undecided voters, and that's the main reaction I've had when I said I'm coming over to Yes. People said, okay, we're going to have to make a decision about what we're going to do, because frankly we don't know. I will be voting Yes.
I was always quite clear that I would vote no. Always, before you vote, look as hard as possible at the small print. Really look at the opportunity in front of you. Well, my name's Caroline Castle. I was born in Hastings in Sussex and I lived most of my life in southern England. And I've always been strong family connections here, and I moved up to Edinburgh about 6 years ago. There is a big difference culturally and socially in Scotland compared to where I used to live. It is a different culture, it's a different country. It has its own identity and it has its own political views, and they're not represented in the UK. I was horrified by the idea that if we don't get a deal, if Theresa May doesn't get a deal that she wants, that her answer to that is to dive down into a low tax, low spend economy, bringing corporation tax down, undercutting everybody. Given what's happening to public services and the NHS at the moment, the effect of that would be devastating, and I was shocked that she would even suggest it. And my daughter, she voted no, but she's definitely voting yes at this time, and I think a lot of young people will feel the same in Scotland. If you have a big negative doom-mongering campaign, I would be very sceptical of it because I don't think it's true. There is a great opportunity for Scotland as an independent country. I shall be voting yes.
In 2014, I was campaigning to remain within the UK. What we were promised was to remain in the European Union. That's become a complete fallacy. It's almost like a different era. My name's Mike Daly. I'm a solicitor advocate in Glasgow. I work for law centres. I've done so for about 25 years. Law centres act on behalf of the public, ultimately helping people to maximise their rights. In 2014, what was on the table was more devolution, greater powers to the Scottish Parliament. It's almost like having the best of both worlds was on the table, remaining in the European Union, but having the ability to do things differently in Scotland. The reality is now, after, goodness, 7 years of austerity, it's quite plain to me that we now are in a completely different situation. If we don't choose to go down that different path, Well, what's the options? The options are to have more austerity, turbocharged austerity under the Conservatives at Westminster. Also, we will be dragged in the direction of travel that the Tories are taking us, which is very much regressive. It's scapegoating people who are different to us. It's scapegoating foreigners. It's punishing people who are not as well off. It's a horrible, horrible future. And I don't want that future for my children. And we can do something about this.
The independence referendum in 2014, I didn't think that the moral authority lay with the national campaign. My name's Tom Morton. I'm a writer and broadcaster, sometime journalist, former light entertainer. Worked for the BBC for about 20 years with a daily music and chat show, and retired about 2 years ago after a small heart incident. Brexit for me is crucial because for me, my inheritance, if you like, that I can pass on to my children and my grandchildren is to be part of Europe. I don't see myself as a little Britain person, or you know, I despair at the thought of my children and grandchildren not being part of a Europe where, you know, there are no borders and where we can actually work together, apart from anything else, for a peaceful Europe and a peaceful world. So, for me, Brexit was the absolute killer app, if you like, and the idea that we were now in thrall to a Westminster government which was going to, first of all, oppose immigration in such a brutal and right-wing fashion and take us out of Europe without any thought for the implications other than some spurious post-colonial nationalist notion of what Britain means. That to me seemed completely anathema. And the offering from the Scottish National Party seemed reasonable. It looked to me to be about a broad church which would offer the possibility of working for the rights of the poor and for social justice. I will be voting yes.
The logical argument when you're being fed fear and lies is to stay with what you've got. It really was an insult to myself to vote no again. I joined Yes Bikers in December 2014 when I converted to the Yes campaign after voting no. It was run by Craig Thompson, and as of June last year he passed it on to me. I voted no. I grew up in an area where there wasn't a lot of Yes activism, so the only information I had was from the BBC and the mainstream media. So for me, it felt logical to vote no with the information I had received.
Now Deutsche Bank has weighed in, likening the potential fallout from an independence vote to America's Great Depression.
I then moved up to university, met new people, opened the door to the information, and then once you have the information, it's a simple choice, and followed by the lack of completion in the vow and all the promises made by the no campaign. It really was an insult to myself to vote no again. This is their last chance, and I expect hundreds of attacks against everybody involved, all the Yes groups, campaigners. I mean, I think the mainstream media will try and focus on a campaign, again, based on fear, lies, deception, and not what it's actually about. And I'll be voting yes.
I felt it took me just after the referendum to actually hear from different sorts of people how the UK government is affecting them and how bad the situation is. What the Tories are right now is they're proposing themselves as to be the progressive right, and what they really are is a new UKIP. And what the Tories are proposing is a small, closed UK. What Theresa May has said, it's just been all pretty dire. Some of my friends are really nervous about the prospects for the future. They're thinking about how is this going to impact me? What's the benefits? What's the disadvantages? None of my friends were pro-Brexit. It has moved them to being more yes, and I think that's really important because they will be the next 16-year-old category to vote in the next referendum. It's important that we start convincing them now because the next referendum will be vital for Scotland. It's about safeguarding Scotland now and not letting it go downhill with the UK. I think the most important thing to say to the older generation is it's our future, it's my future that's in your hands. I want to see myself in an inclusive Scotland. I want to see an inclusive world. I don't want to see a closed off UK. I'll be 16 in September and I'm voting yes.
I think the seeds of changing my mind were probably sown when the Tories were elected. I feel that Scotland is in a really unique opportunity here to escape Brexit. My name is Elizabeth Carnahan and I work in cosmetic ingredients. A large percentage of our customers are in the EU and we rely on barrier-free trade in order to sell to them. So obviously single market membership and customs union membership is super important to our business.
There's no difference between those who try to divide us on the basis of whether we're English or Scottish and those who try to divide us on the basis of our background, race or religion.
I've never had a negative experience in Scotland as a foreigner. I've been here since 2001. People have been kind, welcoming. I've lived all over the world. I've lived in the US, I've lived in Canada, I've lived in Brazil, I've lived in Germany, but I have never felt more at home than I feel here in Scotland. The indie voting community has been extremely welcoming and I was a little nervous because I said no last time and I felt like I crushed a lot of people's dreams, but everyone's been, really welcoming and they seem quite happy to have new people on board, and I'm really thankful for that because my opinion has completely changed. There are a lot of issues tied up in trade they're very complex, and I'm not sure that our current government in Westminster really understand how complicated it is and what we're up against. To say that Scotland will lose trade with the rest of the UK is ludicrous, unless the UK decides they don't want to trade with Scotland. If Scotland remains in the EU, whatever trade deal England has with the EU will be the deal that they have with Scotland. So it's a bit disingenuous to say that would happen.
So I can confirm today that next week I will seek the authority of the Scottish Parliament to agree with the UK Government the details of a Section 30 order, the procedure that will enable the Scottish Parliament to legislate for an independence referendum.
And we are really lucky to have the opportunity to escape from Brexit and to not have to suffer the fallout of a hard Brexit and crashing out of the EU. It's a lucky position, it's a unique position, and not only supporting independence and voting for independence, but getting to decide what happens after that, to become more involved. I've never been a political person, it's not really my thing, but I will never ever sit on the sidelines again. I will always be engaged and I'll always work because we have a chance to build the society that we want to see. And it's not an opportunity that many countries get. So I think we should embrace it. I think we should welcome it. And I think we should all work really hard to build something meaningful and to build something extraordinary. I will be voting yes.
My name is Mark McCurgo. I'm living in Edinburgh. Until quite recently I was living in London, and I'm very delighted to be living in Edinburgh and being a part of the Yes movement. Well, as you can hear, I'm basically English. Actually, my father's family were from Scotland, but I've always been brought up as English.
You know, since the Brexit vote, I've had loads of messages from people in other parts of the UK asking if they can move to Scotland.
I was very, very intrigued by the first referendum. Living in London at the time, I was a Lib Dem member and supporter, but actually independence is on offer for Scotland. Why wouldn't you want that? And it seemed to me, after considering it for a while, that they were actually very, very good. Very broad possibilities for the Scots nation to reclaim its status after 310 years. And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed to me that there is a difference between Scotland and England. In the aftermath of that vote last June, it seemed to me that the SNP were the only ones with a plan at that stage. Very, very inspiring. And so within a matter of weeks, my wife and I decided that it was time for us to make a move, and we've moved to Edinburgh. We've moved our lives, our family, our business to Edinburgh, and we're very excited to be here at this point in the history of the development of Scotland. And the more I've read around it and the more I've experienced, the more I think that's right.
So let me issue this open invitation today. Scotland isn't full up. If you are as appalled as we are at the path this Westminster government is taking, come and join us.
I'm very delighted to be here, and I'd encourage anyone else with commitments in those directions to think about coming to join us. I think there's going to be some very interesting times ahead, and we need support. People are welcome in Scotland, there's absolutely no doubt about that. I've been made so welcome since moving here. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I will be voting yes, absolutely.
Climbing Arthur's Seat on an overcast March day, thinking about politics. The route to the top is thronged and I hear snatches of conversation in many languages. It seems to me, returning after an absence of a few months, that Edinburgh increasingly feels like a European capital. Here is gathered a polyglot crowd of mostly the jeunesse of Europe. The situation has changed and I have changed my view. My name's Jackie Kemp. I used to be a journalist. I'm probably describe myself as a kind of business writer now. I was undecided for ages. At the time I just ended up being very no. Towards the end I suddenly thought, no, this is just a bad idea. It just felt like devolution still had more to offer, but since 2014 that hasn't really come to pass. I feel that the spirit of the devolution settlement is not being understood or respected by the government in Westminster over Brexit. The English people were told that if they voted for Brexit it would threaten the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom, but they didn't take that on board. They didn't seem that interested. So I actually feel, I wrote this in my blog, I feel that England's left us. I don't feel at all bad. I feel that I tried. I really tried personally. I really tried to save the Union. When I was on the no side, I kind of felt like that I wasn't really on the fun side. I think I'm looking forward to being part of the Yes campaign, and I want it to be really positive and inclusive, and I want people to feel really great about being engaged in such an important democratic moment and making history. I will be voting yes.
I came to Scotland in 1993, then basically met my husband and never made it back to Germany. Having grown up in quite an insular country, being able to move anywhere within Europe without any problems made my life what it is now. I feel Scottish by choice, not just German, but Scottish by choice, and I have never encountered any anti-European sentiment in Scotland. I did experience some of that when I lived in England, I have to admit. I felt more than welcome since coming here, and the whole feel like the school, they're doing a lot to integrate, and there's definitely an international aspect to life in Scotland that I hadn't experienced in England.
It's disingenuous of Patrick to say that no means out and yes means in, when actually the opposite is true.
I voted to stay in the UK because I'm all for cooperation and not isolation. And also we hadn't been in Scotland for that long and weren't really very familiar with all the issues. And I like evidence-based politics, and I like to form my opinions on evidence that I've seen.
And I have a sneaking suspicion that actually you won't see too much difference on either side of the border on this one. And they've lied about this here tonight too, and it's not good enough. You deserve the truth. You deserve the truth.
The Brexit referendum, I think, galvanised me to get more active in finding out more about the viability of an independent Scotland. And I think gradually, as I've been finding out more and more, my mind has been changed about it. I also went in search of other news sources because I had been relying on the BBC, but there had been this creeping feeling that the BBC's reporting was becoming rather biased. We have brought so much to this country, and it's important to have a voice, and we do have a voice in this referendum, unlike in the EU referendum last year. So do use it and vote yes. I will be voting yes.
When an individual makes a decision, and they make their decision on the basis of lies, we don't have any problems saying, that decision's not valid. I think it clearly is an invalid decision because it was based on lies. I'm Sophie Grace Chappell. I'm the Professor of Philosophy at the Open University, and I've been living in Scotland now since 1998. Being English and living in Scotland for nearly 20 years now has always been interesting. I was at the swings with my kids, and somebody was broncoing the swings, and I said to them, "Would you please not do that? That means my kids can't use the swings." I was called four-eyed, various unparliamentary bits of language in there. But what I was really struck by, they didn't call me an English bastard. And I thought, no, that was missing, and that was missing for a reason, because I found Dundee, where I live, a hugely welcoming place, very warm and open. And I'm different in other ways, and I haven't had flack for that either, not in Dundee. I just don't experience anti-English prejudice. I just don't.
British people have spoken, and the answer is, we're out.
That was the moment when the dam burst, and I stopped being a no supporter. I became a yes supporter. I became a supporter of Scottish independence because I looked at the referendum map and it was so clear. I've no malice against England, but they're going a different way from us. And we do need to have a settlement that recognises the differences between Scotland and England that have just been so manifestly clarified in this referendum. So Holyrood come up with clear, carefully thought out suggestions about how Scotland could remain in the single market whilst accepting the vote to leave the EU, could remain in the single market even if England doesn't want to. And those aren't even greeted with a no from Westminster, and there still hasn't been a proper written response. And that too, I just think, is symptomatic of a kind of arrogance, a kind of divorce from actually caring about the will of the people. We are being told lies by an elite who serve their own interests and nobody else's. That's one reason I'll be voting yes. Another is because I want to protect the emerging social democracy that we've genuinely got in Scotland, which I think is very exciting to watch. I'll be voting yes because I'm an internationalist and I want us to be part of Europe. If Scotland sets up this beautiful society, this brilliant society where everybody matters, where nobody's excluded, England might well look north and say, hey, we could have a bit of that too. I really believe that Scottish independence long term could be for the benefit of England and Wales and Northern Ireland too. And the safe option, I think, is clearly Scottish independence, not remaining in the UK.
British government have just made such a complete mess of it, and they don't know what they're doing. You can't trust them. So that is why I voted for the SNP. I'm 66 years of age, and I was actually born, believe it or not, with my accent in Glasgow, a place called Penlee. I've lived in England a fair amount of my life, moved up to Scotland in 1976 when I left the army, and I've been in Scotland ever since. I have always classed myself as British. My parents have always classed themselves as British. When I was in the Paras, we were all marched down on voting day and we were told to vote Labour because Maggie Thatcher was disbanding the regiment, and you did what you were told.
The sort of power that actually most federal governments in Western Europe, for example, simply don't have.
I did say to her when we had the last referendum that if the British government reneged on all the promises they gave, that I would certainly go SNP. And unfortunately, they did exactly what I said they would do. And until we go get our own referendum and get freedom, then we're going to be stuck where we are. And slowly but surely, the British government will take a lot of our powers away. And it'll just be reprisal time, like it goes back for hundreds and hundreds of years. They offer you an awful lot of stuff.
It's like home rule within the United Kingdom.
And when you say yes to them, they take it away in the other hand. And we never learn. We never learn by our mistakes in Scotland. And it's about time we did.
I say to the SNP, now is not the time.
Again, if somebody who's like me who doesn't know, they should really, if they've got somebody who can help them, really look into it. You know, check everything out. Listen to what the SNP are saying. Go onto the computer, check backgrounds, see what their promises were, and you'll probably find, I have to say, 75–80% of all the things the SNP have said they will do, they have done their best to do. And I don't think they're a big-headed people. I think they're just normal folk trying to do a good job for their country. I will be voting yes.
Ultimately, I think it's going to be farming that causes a constitutional crisis. Because when we're locked out of discussions, not just about the future of our country, but locked out of discussions about the future of our land, the land itself, and what we can do with it, and how we use it, and how we're going to live in it, I think that's going to be a boiling point.
£350 million a year we don't control goes off to be spent on heaven knows what bullfighting in Iberia, for heaven's sake. Do you think that's a legitimate use of English taxpayers, British taxpayers' money? Absolutely not.
It became clear, particularly as the Tory party, Theresa May, she put a hard Brexiteer, the buffoon Johnson and others in charge.
Andrea Leadsom.
In charge of our future. The way it was going with Theresa May and the Conservative Party, they think, I'm not part of this. I don't want to be part of this. I can't be part of this. These people don't represent who I am and where I want to be.
I think there's a misnomer that's been going around, perpetrated largely by the media, that the single market is a binary choice. You're either in it or you're not. Actually, there's lots of great...
You're either in it or you're not.
I think that the way that the media has handled Scottish independence and handled Brexit has been frightening. It's been frightening in its bias, in its one-sided agenda pushing, and its closing of debate. We now read The National. Oh, Bella Caledonia, we look at Bella Caledonia. I read people's blogs, like We Ginger Doug.
I buy the New European.
We buy the New European sometimes. Wings over Scotland, totally. That's, voice of sanity.
We should be working together to get that right deal for Scotland, that right deal for the UK. So I say that's my job as Prime Minister. And so for that reason, I say to the SNP, now is not the time.
The final straw of understanding Scottish nationalism was when they said, essentially, we don't want to know what you think. 48% of the United Kingdom is to be ignored, in fact, demonised. And in Scotland, your entire country is not to have any say, any voice, any participation in this process at all. Well, wow. What will happen leaving us aside, what will happen to thousands of managed acres in Scotland without farmers? I just can't imagine.
It's about food security. It's about our most intimate association with the environment we live in, our food.
It's also about new clearances. That'll be the next thing.
Yeah, it's about people,
It's
culture.
about clearances. It's about the land will be cleared, not just us, not just farmers themselves and their tiny workforces, apart from the people that come to help from the rest of Europe. It's about the whole rural economy, including all the people who support agriculture, who are involved in agriculture. How can they live? How can they live? How can they live here when we're being decimated, or we're certainly under serious threat of being decimated? So it's going to be like they're just going to, it's going to be a wipeout potentially.
I'm Simon Peer. I'm a journalist. I went over to the dark side, as they call it, when I became media advisor to the Labour leader at Holyrood. I worked for Ian Gray, but first Wendy Alexander before that. And since then, I've been working as a lecturer, teaching journalism, but also freelancing, writing and commentating and TV and radio about politics, and it's been a busy time, and now as though we're looking as though we're heading towards Indy 2.
Is whether you want to break and sever every link, and I say let's keep our UK pension, let's keep our UK pound, let's keep our UK passport, let's keep our UK welfare state.
And I was surprised myself at how depressed I was by the Brexit vote, and I feel very strongly, if people quite simply put it, do you prefer Scotland in the EU or Scotland remaining part of the UK out with the EU? I'll definitely go for Scotland in the EU.
Because the consequences of not having a choice are that we may have to accept a disastrous Brexit that will put tens of thousands of Scottish jobs in line. And you used to agree with me on that.
When you became
Kezia.
First Minister...
You and I spoke the day after the EU referendum, and you told me then that you thought the change occasioned by Brexit meant that you thought Labour should stop opposing a referendum. Now, you've changed your mind, but why should everybody else in Scotland be denied
And it's time, and I say this to Kes Dugdale, I say it to Willie Rennie, I say it to Patrick Harvey as well. It's time to boot party politics, push it backwards and think of the country first. Think of the common ground that all the parties share, and more unites us than separates us. And think of the common weal of Scotland rather than your own party political advantage. I will definitely be voting yes.
An independent Scotland with its own currency, its own taxes, control of its own destiny, would have something going for it, which is just impossible as a part of the UK. I'm Richard Murphy. I'm Professor of Practice in International Political Economy at City University of London, where we're sitting now. I'm a chartered accountant by background. I'm an economist as well. I'm perhaps best known as a tax justice campaigner. In 2003, I was one of the founding members of the Tax Justice Network, and since 2006, I've been writing the Tax Research UK blog, which is pretty widely read, and on that I talk about how tax can be used as a mechanism to create social change. It's my opinion that Scotland is absolutely certainly a viable independent country. Now, places with around 5 million or so people are very clearly, very obviously surviving very well in this world. In fact, more than half the countries in the world are the size of Scotland or smaller. So let's not presume, nobody should presume, that Scotland can't survive because it's small. It actually, in world terms, is a middle-sized state. I've been asked the question often, what would I do if I lived in Scotland? Look, it's obvious from my accent and from my name that I'm not Scottish. But suppose I decided to move north of the border, how would I vote in an independence referendum? I have no doubt I would vote yes. That's not
a wholly rational choice. I don't pretend it is. I don't think, despite the fact that I understand economics, that most of human life is about being rational. Human life is about being emotional. Human life is about making decisions based upon, to a very large extent, what your heart thinks, because we cannot process enough information in our brains to actually make rational decisions. And my heart would tell me Scotland should be independent. And my heart would tell me, and my economic intuitions would support the fact that if Scotland became independent, it could be better off. And the reason why is that when head and heart are combined, and I've given lots of reasons why, the head has to get a lot of things right before Scottish independence can happen on the economy, on tax and everything else. But if that head bit can be got right, then the heart bit can be released to actually release Scotland to achieve its full potential. The goal of any economy, any country, is to achieve its full potential. And right now, Scotland is being treated, as it has been, well, for 300 years probably, as a second-rate bit of the United Kingdom. It isn't. And I go to a lot of countries as a result of my work, around Europe and outside, many of which are the size of Scotland and smaller. Damn it, I hold a passport from Ireland, which is smaller than Scotland. And they are proud and independent and in control of their destinies in the way in which Scotland is not at present, and which it should be. That's why I'd vote yes, because I believe it will release the potential of the people in Scotland to achieve what isn't possible at present. And that, to me, is a goal worth achieving.
One of the things that makes me angry about the whole Brexit thing is that it does threaten the integrity of the UK. But in all conscience, Scotland would be well advised to go if the rest of the UK is going to leave the EU. I'm Professor Anthony Grayling. I'm the Master of the New College of the Humanities in London and the Professor of Philosophy there. My whole career has been in academia, teaching philosophy, writing about it, and also about allied subjects like the history of ideas, biographies, essays. And I was, for a while, a columnist on the Guardian newspaper and on the Times newspaper. I was very keen, and always had been very keen, that Britain should stay together. So I was a unionist from that point of view, wanting to preserve the union between Scotland and England. And there were several reasons for that. My personal reason was that I'm part Scottish myself, part English. In fact, I'm half English, quarter Scottish and quarter Welsh. So I feel very British and a lot of association with all parts of the island of Great Britain.
The decision taken in 1975 by this country to join the common market has been reversed by this referendum to leave the EU.
But my view changed as a result of the Brexit referendum, the EU referendum. And it changed because it seemed to me incredibly unfair on Scotland, which had been quite substantially remain in the referendum vote, that part of the English population should drag Scotland out of the EU, where Scotland had benefited so much from EU membership and was so European in its outlook, and again, as part of history, always had been. Always been very closely associated, for example, with France and other parts of Europe. Scotland is bigger than some EU countries, certainly not just in population terms, but also in GDP terms, could quite well flourish as an independent member of the European Union if it wished to do so. And given the very bad impact that Brexit would have on the United Kingdom, or on the remaining parts of the United Kingdom, if it were to happen, the fact that there would be a much diminished economy, much less in the way of resources for a welfare net, for environmental protection, for consumer protection, for employee rights, for a health service, for a good education service. And so from that point of view, I think it's a democratic right of the Scots people to think, do we want to be dragged along into this, or do we want to be part of the EU project, which of course is a tremendous project, it's a great project. It's got its flaws and difficulties, but any big imaginative historic project like the EU would have difficulties. The one and only thing that Mrs May has ever been right about is that Brexit is Brexit. There's absolutely no right in the world as to why Scotland should be forced to follow on. Scotland would be well advised to go if the rest of the UK is going to leave the EU.
We simply cannot afford to follow in the footsteps of Labour and the Conservatives in not respecting the European Union result in Scotland. I was a no supporter in 2014. I changed my mind.
My dad currently works in DL Steelworks. My granddad worked in the old Ravenscraig. I know from experiencing what my family have been like in unemployment, what it's like, and I suppose that I wanted to go into politics to change that.
In the Daily Record this morning, David Cameron, Ed Miliband and Nick Clegg renewed their promise of extensive new powers for the Scottish Parliament in the event of a no vote.
We need to release that grip of Westminster and Whitehall, which has stifled governance in England and indeed across the United Kingdom for too long. So I see today is the beginning of a process.
Well, I was a no voter in 2014, albeit I only backed no on the basis that the UK would be federal afterwards. Of course, that didn't quite happen afterwards, and then with the English votes for English laws later on, I started to move towards backing independence. Well, I read a lot of the media, which was of course biased, and obviously the Better Together campaign ran a pretty scary campaign, to be honest, which made me worry about, you know, what sort of jobs would be available to me in the future, and, you know, what problems there would be for my family with the likes of pensions if we voted yes. The Lib Dems really did play a role in that, which they shouldn't have. They should have been advocating a liberal version of Better Together with a more federal UK, in fact a completely federal UK.
Hang on, it's one thing to say that you're against having another independence referendum. Everybody knows that's the position of the Liberal Democrats. It's a completely different thing to say that you would have the Parliament in London block the Parliament in Scotland from holding another referendum.
I mean, they do allow us to campaign for yes or no, but I think that the party are going for too hardline a unionist approach here. Almost like a diet conservative idea, which I don't agree with entirely. I think that we do need to advocate keeping our options open and staying in the EU, even if it does mean going independent.
The Conservative amendment is full of irony. It accuses the SNP of division, when it is the Conservatives that have divided this country over Brexit, simply to heal the divisions in their own party.
I mean, the fact that the Scottish Parliament is a temporary institution is actually quite a fact that's not known by many people. It could be abolished by Westminster tomorrow. They can legislate on anything to do with the Scottish Parliament at any time.
Well, I feel that ultimately any power that hasn't been stated as reserved in the Scotland Act that established the Parliament, I think that any power that isn't stated as reserved in that must ultimately come back. I doubt it will happen, and I think that the Lib Dems have to take a tougher stance on that, really hold the Tories to account on it, because the likes of fishing and so on, that should ultimately lie with Holyrood post-Brexit. Well, I imagine Scottish independence as Scotland independent in the European Union and working together with the other member states to almost like Scotland becomes a global force. No, I don't have any doubts at all that we could be successful at all. No, I think that ultimately Scotland has the infrastructure to succeed. It has the minds and the technology to succeed in the world, and it has its own unique talents that it can bring to the global stage. And I think that if we do campaign for independence, as I really do hope that we do, then a lot of those supporters will come back to their true home because they value our work on the likes of civil rights and justice and working for a better education. when the second independence referendum comes round, I know for sure that I'll be backing yes, and I urge my fellow Lib Dems to do so as well.
I believe that the monarchy is something which we really need to talk about as part of independence.
Right on the floor here.
I'm actually got a condition called Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism. Autism just gives me some issues with my social skills. I'm trying to do as much as I can myself, but I do require full-time support from my mother who cares for me. It's very difficult, especially when you've got the Department of Work and Pensions putting you through like work capability assessments and stuff like that, which are unfair.
I found it utterly disgraceful having to go to a medical and be asked, have you ever wanted to commit suicide?
And I do thank Nicola Sturgeon and her cabinet, who are now designing a new social security service, and I think that's crucial. However, the biggest issue, which was the most overriding part of me voting no, which I did vote no, was the Queen. If we were to vote yes, we would still have the Queen and the royal family. I was very uncomfortable with that. So for me, the only true independence that we could be able to achieve, the abolition of the monarchy, would be as part of the package, because then we have total control over our laws and over our destiny. But we've also got like the royal secrets. Monarchy is not covered by freedom of information rules.
My government is committed to building an economy where people who work hard are properly rewarded.
And I know that recently that the Queen has now received an income boost. But we have firefighters, we have police, we have frontline services cut to the bone.
It will therefore continue to reform the benefit system, helping people move from welfare to work.
And to change the law, all without parliamentary scrutiny. I mean, one of the things recently, what we saw was politicians able to change the law, change the descriptor, part of the descriptor in the legislation for PIP assessments without the parliamentary scrutiny. And what can we do about it? Really, nothing. I heckled, shall I say, Ruth Davidson.
But you've got more tax inspectors checking vulnerable people in society. I feel that I'm under surveillance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that, does that help people's mental health? No, it doesn't.
And this is where I think there's some really great work being done in closing the disability employment gap.
800 people a week right now are having their mobility cards
There
taken
are
away.
70,000 more mobility cards that have been issued now since 2010.
It was utter tosh. I think it should be Theresa May and all the other Westminster leaders come up to Scotland and face voters for the appalling policies, appalling travesties in which she and her party have created all across this nation of Scotland, which is thoroughly disgraceful. Every single minute of every single day, it is growing upon me that we cannot trust the Westminster government to deal with our own affairs. We cannot trust them to look after people with disabilities. If we were to have a referendum today for independence, I would be voting yes.
A sense of Britishness, what I used to think it was a sense of inclusion and a sense of cohesion, and I don't know if I know what a sense of Britishness is anymore.
We, living in the North East, didn't want to lose Scotland because the North East didn't really feel like they had an effective voice, and it would have been a great loss for the North East if we'd lost Scotland at that point.
Scotland votes to stay in the United Kingdom. We keep membership of the European Union. We also keep shipbuilding on the River Clyde.
Firstly, it sounds like a lot of what was promised during the campaign hasn't actually been delivered for Scotland. I suppose the most important thing was Brexit. It felt like I didn't know the country that I loved anymore. And no wonder people are angry and feel disenfranchised. It's totally understandable, but it just seems to have been channeled towards the EU and immigrants.
There's utter alienation with Westminster and with Brussels, and that lies behind this large Brexit vote.
You know, to not feel safe in your home, and that psychological safety is just so important. And after 18 years where I'd worked with some of the most difficult people in this country, that wasn't good enough just because of where I was born. We saw a very, very different direction, sound leadership from the Scottish Government.
And we voted to renew our reputation as an outward-looking, open and inclusive country.
That EU citizens such as myself made a valuable contribution. At that point, that was when we decided that we were absolutely for Scottish independence.
I'd like to imagine that an independent Scotland is the beacon that allows the North East to step out the shadow of London.
And if we vote leave on June the 23rd, we can take back control of £350 million a week and spend on our priorities here in this country, including on the National Health Service. We can take back control.
You're still saying they. You need to say we.
Wait. Well, we're seeing that independence is the way forward, and we've only been here a short while.
Earlier, I keep hoping to have the Dallas ending, where Bobby isn't actually dead. He's just in the shower. I think like tomorrow I'm going to wake up and Bobby will be in the shower and everything will be fine.
But it is fine. We're in Scotland. We'd heard a lot about how English people were treated in Scotland, so we were well prepared. We had I suppose a repertoire of assertive and snappy and funny comebacks for when people inevitably would be angry at us for being English, but we've still got them. It hasn't happened yet.
They're still in the wrapper.
I know. We were so well prepared as well. No, people have been absolutely amazingly welcoming. I can't say that enough. We live in Dundee now, and the people are just absolutely lovely, really interested in where we're from. We've been engaged in a lot of really interesting discussions and debates, but no, we've never experienced anything like that, and I certainly haven't had any kind of problems being an EU national either. So yeah, that's really positive. So I'll be voting yes because I believe in Scotland.
I'll be voting yes because I believe it's the only way for Scotland to have some sort of success and be the country it deserves to be.
It's time to have Scotland's future in our own hands. My name is Ashley Grassett. I'm one of the City of Edinburgh councillors. I represent the Sighthill and Gosney ward, which is just fabulous. I'm very passionate about the community and making it work for everyone. I'm also the first profoundly deaf elected councillor for Edinburgh, and it's something that I'm very proud of. I'm very passionate about disability issues for that reason. We'll all be treated as equal and being inclusive society, and I think the policy should reflect that. One of the things with being an elected councillor is that you gain a new perspective on a whole lot of things. Like when you're doing casework and when you're very involved in the community, because I do a lot in the ward and working with different community projects and community organisations and charities and just basically talking to residents. And you're hearing all these stories like, you know, people being sanctioned for ridiculous reasons, and I mean ridiculous reasons, like one who had a child that was unwell and had to take them to the hospital and so couldn't make the appointment at the job centre for, you know, for signing on and other things they had to do. And they got sanctioned for 2 weeks for that, and she had to go to the food bank and dependent on them for food for her children as well as herself. I mean, is that the kind of society we want to live in? At the time, obviously, I thought the no vote was the best because it was safe and it was the status quo. The political landscape had changed massively in the last couple of years, and people have got a new perspective and they're seeing the reality of Brexit, and more people are realising that they've been conned. The future just seems depressing because it just seems to be all about what benefits the rich people and not much about what to do with people that are vulnerable. Scotland has the opposite vision. We want to be inclusive, we want to have an equal level playing field for everyone, regardless of who or what they are. You know, the Westminster policy is interfering with how Scotland wants to build the country. And I think more and more people are just realising that it's time to have political independence so that we can be free, Scotland can be free to make our own choices and for our future and the country that we want to be and the kind of people that we want to be. When there'll be a next referendum, I would definitely be voting for yes.
The British state is completely amoral, often engaged in criminal activity which is covered up, but it lives with a degree of hypocrisy that it isn't amoral, that it's a very moral institution, which is the last thing it is. I used to be a senior civil servant and then an academic teaching politics and international relations before coming here to Scotland.
An Argentine patrol craft has been sunk in a fresh clash with helicopters from the British task force off the Falklands.
When I was a senior civil servant in 1984, I finished up working on what had happened to the Belgrano, the Argentine ship that was sunk in the Falklands War with a loss of over 300 people.
This latest action took place about 90 miles inside the total exclusion zone north of East Falkland at about 4 o'clock this morning.
Why, when the Belgrano was outside the exclusion zone and actually sailing away from the Falklands, why did you give the orders to sink it?
But it was not sailing away from the Falklands. You must accept
no,
that
Mrs.
when we
Thatcher,
gave the order, when we changed the rules...
What I discovered was that the government had been lying about it for 2 years. I finally decided that I'd had enough of that.
Clive Ponting leaked secrets about the sinking of the Belgrano and the Ministry of Defence's strategy to obstruct the House of Commons Select Committee looking into the affair.
And sent 2 papers, which weren't classified, down to the House of Commons, which revealed the government cover-up. And it was at that point that I was arrested and put on trial under the Official Secrets Act down at the Old Bailey. I'd come across some pretty awful things going on, as you might expect, which I couldn't write about in the book that I wrote at the time of the trial and just after, because the government would have loved to prosecute me again. The British state is completely amoral, often engaged in criminal activity which is covered up, but it lives with a degree of hypocrisy that it isn't amoral, that it's a very moral institution, which is the last thing it is. It's this condescension towards Scotland, that it isn't really important and it's not really a separate nation, or if it is, it shouldn't be recognised, because I think the Conservatives in particular, but also Labour, realise that the only way they can control Scotland is by keeping it in the Union. After all, the Tories have been a unionist party for the last 140 years, and they know now. I mean, they've never had a majority in Scotland since 1955. They know that with devolution they will never control it. So the only way to control it is from Whitehall direct. Labour, of course, certainly now realise that they'll never gain power in Westminster unless they can get back the seats that they used to have in Scotland. And it seems to me, I'll come back to it, that independence is simply the only chance Scotland's got in the current situation. There's no doubt that the Conservatives see Brexit as the way to completely neuter devolution, and they intend to do it. They're ruthless enough to do it. They say, and I can't imagine who would be naive enough to believe them, that the powers that are coming back from Brussels will only be held centrally on a temporary basis for 7 years. I don't think anybody is stupid enough, quite honestly, to believe that sort of stuff. And if it is no deal, I think it's inevitable that the government will take emergency powers to deal with the problems. And I know what some of the emergency powers are because I drafted them for the run-up to nuclear war, and they're not likely to be that much different. And it is not impossible that the emergency powers will actually dissolve the Scottish Parliament. I think that the situation could actually get very nasty in that the Conservatives are determined to undo devolution to the greatest extent that they can, and are determined against independence. And when you look at the British in their decolonisation, if you look at Ireland, Cyprus, Palestine, India, they've made a mess of it. It's not going to be easy to get independence, yet it's clearly justified. There's going to be a fight, but it can be done. I will certainly be voting yes.
As the former newspaper editor responsible for the vow, you may be surprised to hear I've always been sympathetic to the concept of Scottish independence. But, on balance, I never considered it the universal cure for Scotland's social ills. However, events shape and change opinion. With mounting anger, I've watched the Westminster government choose to inflict vindictive policies across Britain. And, despite overwhelming evidence, they continue to deny the damage their policies cause. Now we tweet are on the brink of Brexit, an act of self-harm for which future generations will pay a heavy price. Again, Brexit is a choice, but it's not Scotland's choice. Throughout this unfolding calamity, the Westminster government has treated Scotland's democratic preferences with shameful contempt. As a dad, I dread the prospect of shackling my daughters to an isolated Britain ruled indefinitely by this callous, self-serving elite. For all our children, this cannot be as good as it gets. It's our duty to secure for them a better future. I believe that's best achieved through independence.
In 2014, I was a committed no voter, head and heart. I'm now not so sure. I'm ambivalent. It seems to me that we may have to choose, on the one hand, between the undoubted uncertainties of independence and, on the other, exit from the EU and being ruled by people in London who don't understand or believe in the constitutional implications of the devolution settlement. And if that's going to be the choice, I could be persuaded to vote for independence. To be persuaded to vote for independence, I'd need to see much more evidence that Scotland and its institutions are capable of bearing the intellectual, financial and administrative burdens that independence would involve.